when I was going through my scientific degree, I always wanted there to be more communication aspect. I actually thought communication should be an entire specialty in of itself. Because there's a lot of people that do science and obviously, bleed into medicine, bleed into business, don't become researchers. I think there would be another maybe 25% or a large chunk of people that would go specifically towards communication. I would have loved to learn in college, and this was so far departed from what we did learn, but video creation with science, how to animate brain parts. This was what I was fascinated in. I really wanted to be a scientific communicator, communicate these incredibly cool ideas. And I thought that communication should have been a whole avenue. How would you wave your magic wand if you could change the scientific education?
Well,
What things would you be thinking to change?
well, there's two types, isn't there, Evan? In a way, that there's your specialist communication as a scientist. And remember, I'm sure when you were in Trinity, you did a fourth year project, and you would have to make a presentation and a poster, that end of it,
Yeah,
And that's a really important skill, by the way, because
yeah,
when you go out in the big bad world as a PhD student or a postdoc or a professor, you got to communicate your science to specialists as well. Remember, because your job is to disseminate
yeah,
and to move it forward. That's one type, and there's a bit on that, I think. The other bit, just science communication in general, you're quite right. It'd be very useful to have modules and instruction, because it wouldn't just apply to the person as a scientist. You'd learn skills that could be very transferable into any walk of life, really. Because how do you take a complicated idea? How do you explain it in a way that's accessible? That can apply across any discipline. Doesn't that just have to be science? So
yeah,
I'll be very much in favour of introducing some of that as well. I think
yeah.
you do get it as a postgrad more, and then of course there are postgraduate qualifications in science communication, aren't there? But there's no harm in getting it in early, because it would help you. What I've noticed about myself personally, when I began doing more lay audience communication, and it began with the science gallery really in earnest for me,
Hmm.
that helped me in my science communication.
Absolutely.
I could design my slides a bit better for a specialist audience in a way that was clear in a way.
Yeah,
So in other words, it transfers into the general communication back and forth. There's the crosstalk between the two. So a benefit
absolutely.
of having science communication in general,
Yeah.
it'll help the other bit anyway. They'll both feed off each other really, I think. So I'm very much in favour of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of researchers, I think every researcher could really benefit from that, because there is a bit of an idea that research papers are intrinsically hard to read. I mean, it's complicated topics, of
Yeah.
course. It's very in depth. It's very complex, but there is a sense to me that they were always made a little bit unnecessarily difficult. And there was a bit of a sense to me as well that researchers would actually go out of their way to make their paper complex, because it kind of amplified their position a little bit. I'm
Yes.
incredibly smart. Look how complicated this paper is, which is bad communication. It might help you get into a journal because it just looks so complex and difficult. But as you know, that's not how we communicate. And I actually think it creates quite a large wall between research papers and a lay audience, where there doesn't have to be at least as much of a wall there. Like there surely is a way to condense those papers into a way that's at least communicated to a general audience.
That's a new. I've never had. That's a good idea. I haven't had that before, Evan. To be honest, it's a really good idea. Um, it's partly because science papers are very formulaic. I mean, ChatGPT can write them now.
Yeah,
The intro is always the same. It's come to our attention that this is the situation. Here's that. Whatever the lines are, the data part is figure one shows this, and then the discussion. They're very formulaic. They're very dull.
yeah, very
Very
much so.
accessible to even an expert, actually, strangely. So if I stray outside my immediate expertise in immunology into different, I have trouble reading those papers as well.
Yeah.
So you're quite right. There'll be real skill here in terms of getting people to write these scientific papers in a way that's more accessible, for definite. And I haven't heard that described as clearly as you've just said it there, and that would help everybody really. And then, of course, why wouldn't the lay audience somehow get access to this anyway? They're
Exactly.
paying for it often through their taxes or whatever it is.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's another good idea. Yeah, I like that.
Look, I don't think we've put the peer review scientific industry under a microscope in a while to see how it might adapt to the new forms of media. Like, I would love to see research papers in video form. I
Yeah,
know it's complicated for a scientist to be able to do that and present it, but if there was a way that a lab could produce a paper and hand it off to a scientific communicator like myself, who would be able to dissect it down, put some animations on it, make it communicable, make it highly entertaining, engaging, I think you would have a much better communication between the scientists and
yeah,
the general population. There'd be much better conversation there, much more interplay, much more back and forth, much more trust.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you do see sometimes you see a bit of that. There's I've seen that done at conferences where someone has to give a 5 minute lay type presentation. For example, I've also seen you see videos of techniques and things, people in labs doing the techniques and the papers. There's a bit of that going on.
Yeah,
it's heading in that direction. I think ultimately it may well continue along those lines, and especially as we now enter this new era of AI, actually, and of the TikTok generation, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
This has to be beneficial to us all. Of course, the trouble is, you don't want to dumb it down too much.
Yeah.
You don't want to take away from the seriousness of the data and the all that kind of thing either. So there's probably a balancing act needed there. But
Yeah.
certainly, new ways of communicating this stuff would benefit everybody, really.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if you're thinking of starting a new company, send me an email. I think we could. I think we can make this
I like
happen.
your idea now.
I think we could be innovators on this. I'd be glad to have you as a partner. I'd love to have you as a partner. If you enjoyed that short podcast clip, then be sure to check out the full podcast right here.